everyone, and welcome to the Back 40 Feet, where we talk about suburban, urban, and patio gardening. And today's project is processing my hot peppers. I have an entire basket of hot peppers, and I'm going to do some different varieties of processing for them. So first up is I have these little green chilies. These are, a lot of times people see canned green chilies over in the canned food aisle, but I use these a lot when I cook Thai food, and they will keep in your fridge for a really long time. So I don't have to process all of these. But in the middle of the winter or after the peppers have gone by and I just want some green chilies, the easiest thing that I have found to do is to freeze them. And what I'm going to do is slice them in half and get the white membrane out of the chili. And then I'm just going to put them in a freezer bag, try to get as much of the air out of the freezer bag as I can, and just freeze them as that. So that then when I want to use them in any type of recipe, I mean, they're going to be a little wilted when I defrost them, but in terms of putting them in a recipe, I could use them anytime I want. And I usually end up going through all of the green chilies that I end up freezing for the season. Here are my green chilies that have been washed. And to process them is super simple. I have my gloves on because these are hot. Green chilies aren't quite as hot as some of the other peppers that you can deal with, but it still stinks when it gets into your eye. And I have my freezer bag ready to go. So it's very simple. Cut the stem off. I'm going to save that for my compost. And then I'm going to just half this, like so. And then I want to get the pith out. So I'm just going to move my knife down the middle here. It's the seeds that are always so hot. So those are the ones you gotta watch out for. And peppers, unlike some other vegetables, when you are freezing them, do not need to be blanched. So blanching is when you quickly expose the vegetable to either steam or boiling water. And what that does, you'd use that for like green beans, for example, is it stops an enzyme process for the vegetable to break down. So it helps to preserve your fruit. But as I said, peppers do not need to be blanched. Some people like to blanch them to just make them softer so that when you're storing them in the bag, you have a little less air. But this is basically my processed chili that's just going to go directly into my bag. And I'm going to continue with the rest of these. So I am done. This is probably about 14 chili peppers. I'm leaving a couple extra so that I can make some fresh Thai food. And you can see that these are just as halves. And sometimes when you're looking at recipes and it's calling for a green chili, it asks for 1 or 2. And this makes it a lot easier to just grab exactly what you need and not have to open up a whole can of green chilies. Besides the fact, these are still going to taste fresh when you go to use them. So these will be frozen. A couple of things to consider when you are freezing peppers is that you should pretty much freeze them almost the same day as when you pick them. Sometimes if you've left them for too long, they can get sort of a little on the softer side, and some enzymes that already start to break down the fruit have already become active. So it should really pretty much go from like harvest to freezer if at all possible. Obviously, sometimes you just look and realize that you have too much produce, and maybe you realize that you're not going to get to it and you decide to freeze it. That's totally fine. I think anything you can do to avoid food waste is important. But what I'm going to do is when I freeze these, I'm going to make sure I keep them on a nice single layer so that they don't get frozen into each other. And that way, when I open the bag, I can just take whatever chilies I want out when I'm going to use them. So next up is processing some of those jalapeno peppers that I picked. And this is what I'm going to be doing. This is from last year. These are pickled jalapenos, and they are absolutely amazing on top of nachos or hamburgers, or I put them on everything. They're delicious. So these are just pickled. And then the other thing that I'm going to make is these are called bread and butter jalapeno pickles. Although some people call them cowboy pickles, but this is a sweet brine. So you add the sweet with the salt and the heat of the peppers, and they are positively phenomenal. This is the last jar that we have left from last season. In slicing my peppers for making pickles, I slice this at about a 1/4 inch thickness, and you leave the inside attached. You don't pith these. So here I've got a whole bunch already cut. Sometimes when I've cut them to about 1/8 of an inch, when you go to use them, they just sort of disintegrate. There's just not a heck of a lot to them. So having them a little bit thicker is sometimes better. When you pack the jars, you may find that some of the insides fall apart. That's fine. They'll just end up floating down to the bottom of the jars. There is my hot jar, and here are my chopped jalapenos ready to go into the jar. So I am going to first pack that just with the peppers. Here are 4 packed jars, and when you look at them, you can see that there's still a lot of air in there because these are very crisp peppers. So a little trick that I do is I'm going to put about half the brine in here and let the bottom get a little bit soft, and then I'm going to push them down and get a little bit more peppers in here. For the cowboy pickles, I am just going to use a brine that I use for what's called bread and butter pickles. I'll put the recipe at the end of this video. And I had made bread and butter pickles yesterday with my cucumbers, and this is what's left over. So I can just use these for my cowboy pickles. And I can see here that I have just a little bit under 3 cups of brine, so that will help me determine how many pickle jars I should be able to fill with this. So I need to heat this up to boiling to be able to put the boiling liquid over the sliced jalapenos that are in the jars. Here you can see the brine that's in there. It still has a ways to go, so I'm just trying to soften the peppers up. And you know, this is dark as I used cider vinegar. This is also yellow because it has turmeric in it. So now that I've put a little bit more peppers in here, I'm ready to finish the liquid. So I'm going to come over here, see if I can do this while I'm filming. And I'm going to go to a 1/4 of an inch for headroom. So here you can see that it's at a 1/4 of an inch. Before I finish adding more liquid, what I need to do is make sure that there's no air pockets. So that's when I get my plastic stick and do a little poking around in here. I'm going to add my pickle crisp to keep my peppers nice and crisp. And this is intended to be a 1/8 of a teaspoon per pint, but these are half pints. So I'm going to just basically sprinkle a couple of granules in there. Here you can see the granules on top. They'll just end up dissolving when I can these pickles. So then I'm going to take my lid. The lids do not need to be sterilized. If you put these in boiling water, it can actually degrade the seal. So these just should be clean. So those are going to go on top, nice and fitted. And then this is your sealing ring, which screws on like that. Right now this is just finger tight because this is boiling. So I'll have my jar holder and screw on the lids. So there, I've secured the lids. So now this is going to go into the water to be ready to be boiled. Put it right in the rack. Last up is just my pickled jalapenos, not as the cowboy pickles. So it's pretty easy. The ratio for water to vinegar is 2 to 1, so 2 cups of water to every cup of vinegar. And then you can just figure out how many jars you're going to be making and accommodate that. For every 3 cups of liquid is 1.5 tablespoons of your pickling salt. So I've put 1.5 tablespoons in here. I am adding my 2 cups of water, 1 cup of white vinegar, and I'm going to get this onto a boil. And just a moment to talk about vinegar. This is just distilled white vinegar. And I could easily just as well use cider vinegar, but I think that aesthetically it makes a prettier pickle when I'm just trying to highlight the actual vegetable. So that is why I'm using white vinegar. I can process both batches of pickled peppers together. So some of these are the bread and butter pickles, or the Cowboy Pickles, and then the others are just the pickled jalapenos. So I have these evenly balanced in the hot water, and I'm just going to submerge these. And what I want to check is make sure that I have an inch of water over these, and you know, when they were boiling, even though this is the same volume, I did boil some of the water off. So I'm going to need to add a little bit more water and get these to a boil. Once these are boiling, I'm going to then set the timer for a full solid 10 minutes of boiling in the hot water bath. I've just taken them out of the hot water bath. Some of them are still bubbling, and I'm going to set them here to cool. And the way to know that you've pickled correctly is that these domes that are here will eventually pop inward. You'll hear little bunks as they start to cool and make a vacuum, and now you've successfully canned.